Taiwan inaugurates its first female president. Tsai Ing-wen's party has called for independence from China in the past, but she's promised to maintain stable relations. How will she balance the need to keep Beijing on side while reducing Taiwan's reliance on its neighbor? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Sika. Taiwan's new president is a woman who's not afraid to highlight the island's unique identity. That's worried some in China, who say she has ushered in a new era of uncertainty. Tsai Ing-wen struck a conciliatory tone after being sworn in on Friday, but she'll have to manage expectations among increasingly independent-minded Taiwanese and a watchful China. Lots for us to discuss, but first this report from Adrian Brown in Taipei.
The final part of Tsai Ing-wen's historic journey to the presidency. The woman who's promised to light up Taiwan opted for a low-key dress code. The moment that confirmed Tsai as Taiwan's first female head of state. Her cautious approach to China was evident in this ceremony. In her inaugural address, there was no mention of Taiwan being part of China, although she did call for dialogue with Beijing.
The two governing parties across the strait must set aside the baggage of history and engage in positive dialogue for the benefit of the people on both sides.
On a loud and proud day for Taiwan democracy, Tsai's speech was not what China's leadership wanted to hear. On relations across the Taiwan Strait, they'd called for something more explicit. Most of the address by Tsai focused on domestic issues and the challenge of how to reshape old economic policies. Some who voted for her have high expectations.
We hope wages can grow for everyone to live a happy life. Also, it is important that property prices stay reasonable so that young people can afford to get married and start a family.
Low wages have been a common problem in Taiwan. That's why we went overseas to look for work. But my heart belongs to Taiwan, so I hope there will be jobs to keep us home.
Friday was also a celebration of the long fight by the Democratic Progressive Party for self-rule. This is an historic day for this young democracy. Tsai Ing-wen is now arguably the most powerful female politician in the Chinese-speaking world. But China's leadership will not be happy. There is now growing opposition to its influence, not just here, but also in Hong Kong. The ceremony offered reminders of Taiwan's diplomatic isolation. Just 22 countries recognize the island republic. With China's growing economic might, that total could become smaller. Adrian Brown, Al Jazeera, Taipei.
Well, Taiwan's very existence has been a source of conflict with China for 70 years. When the Chinese Civil War ended in 1949, the losing Kuomintang government fled to Taiwan. Although the island has its own government, China says Taiwan is part of its territory, and it has not allowed it to be internationally recognized. Relations have warmed slightly since 1992, when the two sides agreed to the so-called 92 consensus. It says there is one China, but doesn't define which government represents that China. Beijing and Taipei both say they do. Well, let's bring in our guests now for this Inside Story. Joining us from Taipei is Chen-shen Yen, Research Fellow at the Institute of International Relations in Taiwan. In Beijing, we have Jia Xiudong, Senior Research Fellow with the China Institute of International Studies. And in Nottingham, Steve Tsang, Professor of Contemporary Chinese Studies at the University of Nottingham. Good to have you all with us, gentlemen. Now, Chen-shen Yen, let me start with you. Your thoughts on President Tsang's speech?
Well, I think she doesn't meet the demand of Beijing by explicitly spell out the word 92 consensus. But in fact, she has gone the furthest she has done so far, but not only acknowledging that there is a 92 meeting, which is a historical fact. But also she mentioned there was a mutual acknowledgement and understanding. I think, it's almost like a 92 consensus, but not the magic word of 92 consensus. So that's one. Secondly, she did mention about the Republic of China Constitution, and that Constitution has a one China, at least in spirit. So she didn't speak about one China, but she indirectly referred to Taiwan, as she will defend the Republic of China, the sovereignty, and that's one China. So in a way, she is bypassing the words that Beijing want to hear, but at least she is sounding more conciliatory and not offending Beijing, not provoking Beijing. And I think the best part of her speech may be the U.S. will have a very, satisfying response to this one.
Steve Tsang, what did you make of the speech? Did she satisfy that delicate balance of sticking to her ideals but keeping Beijing happy at the same time?
Well, I think she has made an excellent speech, and it's an absolutely fantastic start for a new presidency. Her focus was not on cross-strait relations. Her focus was on domestic politics, and she came across as being humble, engaging, and at the same time ambitious. But in terms of the cross-strait relations, I would agree with the speaker from Taipei that she has in effect met what Beijing could reasonably have expected of a new democratically elected president from Taiwan, but she did not say the magic words that Beijing wanted her to say. She did not simply openly say, I, Tsai Ing-wen, accept the 1992 consensus. But nobody in her position with her electoral mandate could have said that. That is something which China will have to understand and use that as a basis to move the relationship forward in a peaceful and mutually constructive way. But whether Beijing will do so, I think, remains a very big open question.
Yeah, Jia Xiudong, the reaction, the official reaction from China to that speech was a little bit cool, but I suppose the general impression from them is more what she didn't say than what she did.
She has been trying to be vague in referring to the 1992 consensus. Actually, compared with former leader of Taiwan, Ma Ying-jeou's inauguration speech, you can see that actually she's trying to allude, referring very clearly to the one China principle. And she also mentioned that keeping the existing mechanisms of communication and consultation with the mainland. Yes, in the past 8 years, the two sides have established quite a number of mechanisms of dialogue and consultation, which have played a very constructive role in promoting closer ties across the strait. For the mainland, of course, Tsai Ing-wen is trying not to appear to be very provocative, but the mainland, the people on the mainland certainly keep very watchful eyes and or not listen to what she has to say in inaugural speech, but also will follow very closely what she will do in the next in the future, and that's also very important.
Chen-shen Yen, how do people in Taiwan view the issue of the island's independence right now? Because it would seem, I mean, this is what's seen as a pro-independence party, the president's party, and it seems more and more people in Taiwan are leaning towards moving to independence. How does that complicate the new president's job?
Oh, if Taiwan declare independence and China will not use military force, then of course majority of the Taiwanese people probably will vie for independence. But we also know that if Taiwan declare independence, it will invite a military attack from Beijing. So if this is what happened, then very few people wanted to take that risk. So that's why Tsai Ing-wen and the DPP, since last year in 2015, before the election, during the campaign, she started talk about maintaining the status quo. The status quo means we don't know whether we don't want to provoke Beijing now. But if Beijing allow, maybe we will choose independence. But for the time being, we want to keep maintaining the status quo. So this is, I think, the challenge for Madame Tsai, because on the one hand, she was talking about Taiwan independence being part of the blood in the young people and encouraging this Taiwan identity. But then when you assert your Taiwan identity, you really cannot have independence. So you get more frustration. So right now she's talking about status quo. It's almost like moving the DPP into a different political space. But I think this is where I would like to see Beijing show some goodwill, because you cannot expect DPP to have a 180-degree turn. But now it's turning 90-degree. You want to give them some goodwill so that they will stay there for a while before moving to the 180-degree you expect. But if you don't, then they will go back to the original, more independent type of position. That will cause greater tension.
Steve Tsang, how do you view the issue of independence in Taiwan and this increasing identity that people feel there of being Taiwanese over Chinese?
I think it's misleading to describe the DPP under Tsai Ing-wen as a pro-independence party. In the last couple of years, under the leadership of Tsai Ing-wen, the DPP was already moving its position, and its position essentially is that Taiwan is, for all intents and purposes, an independent country. Therefore, there is no question, there's no issue of Taiwan declaring independence. And that independent state in Taiwan, according to the DPP under Tsai Ing-wen, is called the Republic of China. It's a name that they don't particularly like, but it's a name that they have and they will continue to use. Now, that is not in contradiction with supporting people in Taiwan to develop their sense of identity, their sense of community, and the sense of communal cohesion. You can say that ultimately it is moving Taiwan in a direction further from what the Chinese government in Beijing would like. But what the Chinese government in Beijing would like essentially is some kind of arrangement by which Taiwan would be part of China. That is something which there is no constituency in Taiwan more than single-digit number in all opinion polls already. So I think it is perhaps more appropriate to say that the DPP under Tsai Ing-wen is pro-Taiwan rather than pro-independence.
Jia Xiudong, obviously the issue of Taiwanese independence is a sensitive one in mainland China. But when you look at these polls that show that an increasing number of people favor independence in Taiwan, Taiwanese independence, particularly among young people during the last 2 decades, more of them identifying themselves as Taiwanese rather than Chinese. That's something that has to worry the government in Beijing, surely.
Actually, for the forces which stand for the independence of Taiwan, they have been trying to create a different identity for the people of Taiwan. Certainly for the people on the mainland, they will not accept the independence of Taiwan. Actually, the forces for independence of Taiwan created a lot of tensions across the Taiwan Strait under the Chen-shen Yen's 8-year administration. And actually tensions have eased upon Ma Ying-jeou's taken office, when the two sides actually maintain the consensus of 1992, and then they can actually focus on cooperation and exchanges in crucial areas of interest, of important interest to the people of Taiwan and the people on the mainland. So the people here on the mainland certainly will not see any movement towards the independence of Taiwan. Actually, people here on the mainland are very much concerned about the kind of creeping movement towards independence of Taiwan under the Chinese administration, because that may create a lot of tensions and problems for the exchanges and cooperation across the strait.
Chen-shen Yen, I mean, in President Tsai's speech, he talked a lot about domestic issues, particularly the state of the Taiwanese economy, which has been continuing to deteriorate. 13 straight months of decline this past month. But that is another issue as well that's inextricably linked with China. Its economy is very much dependent on China. Do you get the sense that President Tsai will try to steer Taiwan's economy towards less reliance on the Chinese mainland?
I think she has been very cautious in talking about finding new markets, signing new free trade agreement with other Pacific economies, not putting eggs in one basket. But she didn't say, I'm not going to, Taiwan's economy should not depend on China, but saying depend on one market. But we know she is talking about China. But at the same time, you find that a lot of this free trade agreement or any kind of overture with Southeast Asia, still there should be some kind of understanding with mainland China so that China would not block this kind of interactions. Even Taiwan's interest in joining the TPP, we think America will be able to help us get in. But don't forget that all members of the TPP, 12 of them, each one can have a veto of the new members' admission. So China can mobilize one or two of its allies to stop Taiwan. So yes, we want to have a more spread out the economy, diversify our markets, but all this you still have to have a good cross-strait relations before you can achieve that. And in addition, cross-strait economic action is also important for Taiwan. So if Taiwan lose all this mainland tourists, mainland trade, then Taiwan's economy decline, and we have even less bargaining power or leverage to deal with China. So I hope she understands that, but at least I think she understands if we want to diversify our markets and moving some of the investment to Southeast Asia, you still have to maintain some kind of understanding with Beijing.
Yeah, how do you see that economic relationship, Steve, saying of perhaps wanting to diversify Taiwan's economy more, not wanting to make it so reliant on Beijing, but at the same time not hurt that relationship either?
Well, the idea that Tsai Ing-wen would order business in Taiwan to turn away from China and turn its focus to the rest of the world is completely unrealistic and not what Tsai Ing-wen has asked for. She's really just saying that Taiwan needs to have a much more diversified partnership in terms of its global economy and not be too reliant on China, which is a very significantly slowing economy at the moment. We should bear in mind that even in the 8 years of Chen Shui-bian's time as president, the other DPP president, Taiwan's economic investments in China and trade with China continue to increase, even though tensions also increased. So all that Tsai Ing-wen, I think, is trying to do is to be very sensible in trying to make the economy in Taiwan much stronger, we also need to bear in mind that Taiwan is a genuine market economy, and business people will go and do business with whichever partner where they can make more money, and that will not be changed simply of an instruction from Taipei. It's a very, very different contrast with the situation in China, where government policy can have a major impact on the direction and flow of investments, not in the case of Taiwan. That won't happen.
So, Jia Xiudong, when we look at this economic relationship between the two sides, it is one where they're each reliant on the other, isn't it? I mean, I'm just looking at these figures. Taiwanese companies invested about $60 billion in China. 1 million Taiwanese now live there, many of them running Taiwanese factories. So any attempt by Taiwan to try to steer its economy away from China, how's that likely to be met in Beijing?
Well, actually, the trade with the mainland is not the source of economic problems or economic woes in Taiwan. Actually, the trade and investment relations with the mainland have contributed to economic growth in Taiwan, to jobs, employment in Taiwan, and keeping Taiwan very much competitive in many areas. So actually turn away from the mainland economy will not be a viable solution or option for the people of Taiwan. Actually, the Taiwan's problem is that it should increase its competitive, the competitive of Taiwanese enterprises, so that, because at this moment, the world economy is sluggish, Taiwan has not only to compete with the businesses on the mainland, but also with economies in the region, like other economies like South Korea, Singapore, and Hong Kong. So actually, if some people in Taiwan would like to turn away from the mainland, talks a lot about so-called over-reliance on the mainland of Chinese economy. Actually, they are talking about they are afraid that the reliance, interdependence with the mainland will make it difficult for the people, for some people in Taiwan to move towards the independence. So actually, they are talking. They have their political agenda instead of any serious considerations about economic interests of the people in Taiwan. And actually, there is no way that Taiwan can turn away from the economy in Taiwan. The trade and economic relationship is very much mutually beneficial to the both sides.
Steve Tsang, in the last minute that we have left here, I give the last word to you then. How do you see this relationship between China and Taiwan unfolding over the next few years?
China will try to keep the ship on an even keel. Taiwan will not do anything to provoke Beijing. The initiative is held in the hands of the Chinese government. They can make this relationship work. It's not a relationship in the way that Beijing would like, but it's perfectly workable. But equally, they may well choose to put more pressure on Tsai Ing-wen to make Tsai Ing-wen behave more like what Beijing would have liked her to behave, in which case she would politely decline and go on in her own way.
Good to get all your views on this, gentlemen. Chen-shen Yen, Jia Xiudong, and Steve Tsang. Thanks very much for being on Inside Story. And thank you for watching. As always, you can see this program again online anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Hazem, Sika, and the whole team here, bye for now.